All right. Well, today on the show, we are excited to talk to Brett Davis. Brett, how are you today?
I'm doing great. And you?
I'm doing really good, man. And I'm so excited to talk to you today about the topic we're going to get to dive into, Brett. But before we dive in, I would love for you just to introduce yourself, share a little bit of your story with our audience.
Oh man, I my name's Brett. I'm a pastor out here in Colorado. Been in ministry in varying forms for the last 10 years or so, since I graduated from Beeson Divinity School back in 2011. And yeah, I am captivated by Jesus, I think is the main tagline that I would give about my bio. I'm married to Joy. Got two girls, 5.5 and 4.5, keep us on our toes.
Hmm.
Yeah, I am. But the all of that, all of the biographical stuff comes in the key of I love Jesus, and I'm surprised by the number of pastors that I feel like I interact with, that that's not necessarily the burning thing
Hmm.
within them, and I continue to be more and more captivated by him.
Oh, man, that's good. That's a good word. That's awesome. So, Brett, today we're going to dive into the book of Revelation. And
I know.
you wrote a book, just a phenomenal book, called "See the Strange: The Gospel According to Revelation." I've heard you on, I believe it was the Unbelievable podcast, share a
Yeah,
little bit
that's
about where that book came from. But this book came from you preaching through it. Is that right?
yeah. I was preaching through. I was pastoring a very small church. I mean, really small, as
Mhm.
in um, 25 people, average attendance of 8.
Yeah,
It
I
was
got you.
really kind of a small, dying church that my wife and I had stepped into for about 3 years, and I. At some point, we had a couple of, I think, an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old boy in our congregation, and they really wanted to talk about Revelation because, of
Hmm.
course, that's what 8-year-old and 10-year-old boys
Oh yeah.
want. There. And so I said, well, why not? So yeah, preached through it. I think it was 16 sermons. But then, as I dove into the scholarship, into the literature during that time, and as I finished the sermon series, I was recognizing that there weren't very many great popular level resources on the Book of Revelation that I could point, just Joe parishioner
Hmm.
towards. And so yeah, over the next year and a half or so, I just took those sermons and did a substantial amount of editing and kind of supplementing to them. And yeah, there it is. That's the book.
Yeah. Well, it's so clear, it's so helpful to read, and I would just encourage our audience to check it out. I know a lot of our audience, pastors, church leaders, this is a resource, a book that you're definitely going to want to dive into. But Brett, I would love to just dive in here, and when people think about the Book of Revelation, I mean, they come with all kinds of different starting places. The first thing people want to talk about is the rapture, or the Antichrist, or left behind. There's just all kinds of different places where people are coming from. Is there a certain place that you would say, when we come to the book of Revelation, we should start here, and that will be a helpful place for us to understand what's happening in the book?
Sure. So like on a really broad scale, it's funny to, as you name those things that people start with, whether it's rapture, antichrist, tribulation, whatever. It feels like a lot of times people equate, maybe almost universally, people equate the Book of Revelation with eschatology. That
Hmm.
might be the first kind of uh, point where we want to press on for a second, because the best I can tell, this book is not preoccupied with the future in the way that the church has been historically in different seasons, or that we are as Western 21st century Americans. or wherever you happen to be listening in, Western civilization, in Western culture. And so, I think equating Revelation with eschatology is maybe the first thing that we want to just name and say, I'm not sure if that's the best reading of the book, because this book, because if it's primarily about the future, then it's hard to understand how this letter, and it is a letter, how this letter to 7 historical churches in Turkey actually spoke encouragement to the Christians of the first century. And so a lot of people obsess over, I don't think that's too strong of a word, obsess over Revelation with kind of like a speculation about the future and what can we know? And we know that we know this is speculation and we're kind of like out here, out on a limb or something. And I want to cling really closely to the tree. I don't want to go out on a limb. I want to know what can we actually know about the text? What can we actually know about the historical circumstances around this text? And I think the first place to start is the very first verse of the book, which is, this is an apocalypse, Iesu Christou. It's the genitive right there. It's of Jesus Christ. In the book, I think the genitive is doing both objective and subjective work right there, to use the technical terms. I think it's all the ambiguity of our English word of. It is a mess. This is a apocalypse, which is just like a revealing, a pulling back of the curtain, a sudden seeing. And it is of Jesus Christ. It is from Jesus Christ, and it is about Jesus Christ, a Jesus Messiah, the Messiah of Israel. And so, that's my starting place, is that the book tells us from its very beginning, not speculation about the future, but what this book actually is about. And it is primarily about the man Jesus. It is about the human being of the first century. Robert Jensen says it's about Mary's child and Pilate's victim, is the way that Jensen formulates it. From womb and tomb, those are the things, the womb of Mary and the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. This is a real historical figure that this ancient document is purporting to give something about, that it's from him, that he is the living one who is somehow speaking through this, and that it is revealing something of him as well. And so since this is such a confusing document, we probably ought to lean on the Gospels to get a personality profile of who Jesus is and what he's about, as well as the letters written within a few decades of him. Let's start with all of that about the man Jesus, and then read this ancient document with all scholarship and all that through him. And so, to summarize, our starting points are the cross, and I would say the creed, the Apostles' Creed, because that's really like the Cliff's Notes version of the story that the ancient church recognized that we are living in. And let's run Revelation through that. And insofar as it speaks to the future, that's great. There are all kinds of moments within the rest of the New Testament that speak to the future. But insofar as it's using imagery to speak about other things, let's recognize that it's speaking about other things: the character of God, the vocation of the church in the world, the way that human systems and even spiritual evil can get out there and co-opt giant systems. Those are things that we miss if we're focusing just on Revelation being primarily, preoccupied about the future.
Yeah, I think you I think you answered there the next question that I was going to ask. So what are some common mistakes that people make when it comes to the book of Revelation? And is that one of the big answers, that when we come to the book of Revelation, we think that we're reading a book that is mainly about the future, events that have not happened yet?
Yeah, I think so. Like common mistakes is, yeah, that would be a big common mistake. Either that we're looking for trivia about the future,
Hmm.
just I don't know if it's just some sort of like voyeuristic, like I don't know, curiosity, like oh, I just want to see, or if it's more like akin to Back to the Future 2, the sports almanac of where it's like if we know what's going to happen, then we can somehow get some sort of power over the future.
Hmm.
But then that's driven largely by fear, and that's I think one of the big things that I would want to ask people, that I do ask people about how they're reading Revelation, is how much fear actually lies under the surface of what you think about the future, and also the way you feel about the present.
Hmm.
That you're obsessing over, you see preachers with giant timelines behind them on tapestries, and this sort of thing. We if you watch if you, I don't know if TV is a thing anymore. Everything is streaming now, so it's less likely to just run across it on a Christian channel. But yeah, I think the fear that you see in pastors who peddle this sort of thing is the audience is in fear, and they're looking for some sort of power that they can get over the future. Yeah, and trying to rack my brain about it's not just the future with like mistakes that we could make. I mean, I think some of the big mistakes that people make regarding this are like I I think one of them is that people will tend to read it in isolation.
Okay.
Like they'll open to the back of the Bible and they'll be like, I'm gonna crack this code. Like there hasn't been 2,000 years of church history before them reading this. You want to read it with others. Something
Hmm.
you want to do, both in your community, but then your community needs to be reading Revelation with other communities. And so there are like two levels of reading this book with others. You want to be reading it with people who know what they're talking about, who have done like some study on this, on who know the Bible as a whole really well. Yeah, you've got. I worry about. I have a friend that we go out for lunch, every few months. That's what adult friends do, is you get together periodically every few months. His mom is really preoccupied with end times.
Hmm.
I'm talking like prepper with bunker, kind
Yeah.
of like getting water and that sort of stuff. And she bases it all on like a particular reading of the book of Revelation that is kind of uh, premillennial dispensationalist kind of thing. But I ache for her because I just wonder, how much have you read? You are doing so much adapting of your life. Your life is being so distorted by a particular reading of this ancient document. But how much have you read with other people? Or are you just listening to one or two voices on it? So read it with others, and make sure that the others you are reading it with are reading it with even more others.
Hmm.
Um, I think you want to read this book with not just a newspaper in hand. I
Hmm.
don't even know if newspapers are still a thing, but headlines. You don't want to just be grasping for headlines when it comes to the book of Revelation, though there at the end of all things, I may look back and be surprised. But you want to really read this book with stacks of newspapers, like through history, because people have read the book of Revelation as throughout history, um, linking it to the headlines of their day. And most all of the time, we don't have a good track record. Humanity doesn't, the church doesn't, on this. We ought to be humbled by the history of headlines that have been linked to Revelation and then turn out not to be so. There was a popular theory at one point that Ronald Wilson Reagan was the Antichrist, because each of his names, Ronald Wilson Reagan, are of 6 letters.
Mm.
And it didn't help that his after his presidency, he moved to an address, and the street address, it was like St. Cloud Drive. Don't quote me on that, but it was something like that. But the street address was 666,
Oh, man.
and and I'm not making this up. And so people just go, their
Oh,
heads
yeah.
explode, and they link Revelation with headlines.
Mm.
And I think Nancy Reagan actually she petitioned to have the street address changed, and that's probably a good move. But you want to read this with others. You want to read it with stacks of newspapers. You want to read this book within the canon,
Yeah.
itself. This is a book that the church has associated with, depending on your tradition, in the Protestant canon, with 65 other books. And so a lot that they've recognized for a century after century that this document actually, like the symbols within this document, are not symbols that can just be willy-nilly interpreted, that they're actually preloaded with meanings.
Mm.
And they're part of the grand story of the man Jesus, who brings the kingdom of God through his death and his resurrection, and draws us to the Father by the power of the Holy Spirit. And so if you're reading Revelation in a way that doesn't take into account, doesn't have any congruence with that reading, with that larger story with which it has been associated, maybe rethink it.
Mm.
And the last thing I'd say, like, maybe one of the biggest mistakes I would say that people make reading this is that they're reading the book of Revelation in the shadow, maybe like of Mount Olympus, rather than in the shadow of Calvary. Calvary is where the shadow of the cross, that is where we learn that God, the man Jesus, is the enfleshment of the divine. He's the enfleshment of God. He says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And so there is a certain character that God has, and we see it in Jesus. We already know God's personality profile. It is Jesus's personality profile. And so if we're reading through the difficult parts of Revelation, whether it's trumpets or bowls or whatever, and it doesn't sound like the character of Jesus, the Christ-like God revealed in Jesus, then we're, if it sounds more like Zeus, or Odin, or the power of Thor, then we're probably not reading it in the shadow of the cross.
Mm.
The Revelation is a cruciform document. That's actually where the book goes in its early scenes. Is it reveals a lamb standing as though slain, sitting or standing at the heart of heaven. And so, yeah, it feels like John goes to great lengths to make sure we don't miss that fact. So read it with others. Read it with not just a newspaper, but stacks of newspapers. Read it within the whole story of the Bible, and read it through the cross, because that's where we find out what God is like.
Yeah. How much of our could you talk about apocalyptic literature? How much of our confusion with the book of Revelation comes from we just are not familiar with this kind of literature? Like you said, the Bible's made up 66 different books, different genres in the Bible, and one of those is apocalyptic literature. And so how much of our confusion is just based on that? And just talk about apocalyptic literature for a minute.
Yeah, I think in the book I actually make a comparison to War of the Worlds, That's maybe a really good example of when people misunderstood the genre of what they heard, it actually like wrecked them.
Yeah.
It caused all kinds of pandemonium. I think that's at least contributing to what's been happening with Revelation over the centuries. Revelation belongs to, we call it a genre, and I think that's right. It's a particular way of writing that's got lots of images and metaphors and symbols, and it's telling some sort of story, and usually this genre has an otherworldly kind of being, like an angel or something, bringing a message to a human recipient. There's a lot of times vision or a dream that's happening. And what's being apocalypsed, what's being revealed, uncovered, is some sort of like reality that we are not familiar with, some sort of transcendent reality, that usually involves like ultimate salvation, and also reveals that there is more going on behind the scenes than what we recognize. So it's looking into the future, but then it's kind of looking behind the curtain spatially as well, and saying, "Oh man, there's all kinds of stuff at work behind the realities that we take for granted in as we're reading headlines." And so, yeah, there's a lot of different, we got a lot of different examples of this, whether it's first century texts, whether it's in the canon itself. The book of Daniel, if you want to read one, read Daniel 7 and 8. Together are going to be giving you a pretty good example of it. Zechariah, scholars go back and forth, but man, read the book of Zechariah. You got to find it first in your Bible, but then once you do, man, you're going to start reading about like different colored horses running out into the world, and you're going to say, "Oh man, that sounds a lot like Revelation." So yeah, it's a genre just as much as like a slasher film for us, or science fiction, or anything like that. So there are certain tropes, certain things that you would expect to usually see in it, and you shouldn't be surprised when you see those things. And those things are actually pointing us, are part of the convention of the genre, pointing us towards what it is wanting to reveal. And it already tells us in verse 1 what it's wanting to reveal. It's Jesus. It's Jesus.
Yeah. You use that word reveal a lot. I think it's, and you bring this out in the book, that the word revelation is where we get our word apocalypse. And that word, tell me if I'm overstating this, that word apocalypse in the Bible does not mean the end. It means revealing. So the word, if I look up the word apocalypse, it's the end of the world, but the Bible never uses apocalypse to talk about the end of anything. It's a revealing. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't think that's oversimplifying it. Yeah, if the word in Greek is just apocalypsis, and it literally just means a revealing. That's the way that it's used other places in the New Testament, just like that, of revealing these things. When Jesus says that you've revealed these things to little children, the verb form right there is apocalypse. You've apocalypsed these things to little children, and you've hidden them from others. And so, yeah, it's apocalypse is it's a Greek word that just means reveal. And then, but it's become through the years, it's come into the English language as basically the equivalent of like The Walking Dead or Mad Max, post-apocalyptic wastelands. That's the sort of way that's what the word means functionally in English, but that's not what the word means in the New Testament.
Yeah, I just think that alone almost changes the way that you interact with Revelation, just to have that little piece of info right there.
Totally.
Yeah, because if Revelation is revealing something, would it be correct to say that the original readers of Revelation, those 7 churches, they had a better understanding. They had a clearer understanding, maybe even a better way to say it, a clearer understanding than we would, because it's being revealed. So the book is not written to confuse or redirect, or it's written to show you something, to make something clear
Right.
and plain, right?
Yeah, without doubt. I mean, in the letters to the churches that are in chapters 2 and 3, there are several places where various people get mentioned, for example, of like the Nicolaitans or Jezebel, this woman Jezebel, and that we don't have any idea really who these people are. You can the Nicolaitans, I think, pop up in Irenaeus against heresies, and so we can reconstruct maybe these are the same people that are being referred to from a few decades before, in John's Apocalypse. But yeah, there's a whole lot that was just on the ground reality for them that we have to kind of like bend over backwards to reconstruct. When it would have just landed for them. The example I give in the book is to the letter in Laodicea. He's talking about it's the voice of Jesus speaking to this church, and he's talking about they're well dressed and they consider themselves rich and they don't need anything, but they're actually poor, pitiful, and blind. And blindness actually for Laodicea is a really big deal, because they were known throughout the ancient world as the place where eye salve. They generated eye salve there, and so that's something that would have landed for that ancient church. But it takes us doing homework and history for us to realize, oh gosh, that would have just landed for them. Likewise, when he says that, they're not cold or hot, and I'm going to spew you out of my mouths. The Laodiceans, they knew that they didn't have they didn't have hot springs or cold water there in their city. The only thing they had was like this really gross, like little spring that was like soaked with lime water. It would make people sick. They would vomit. And so that's another moment in Revelation where it's like, oh, this just would have landed. Like he's eating their lunch. He's reading their mail. And so, but we have to do quite a bit of homework. I also think I was in conversation with email conversation. I don't want to make it sound sexier than it was, but with Richard Bauckham about this. He read through the book and was gracious enough to write a foreword for it. But we were talking about how much people would have just intuitively understood. And he pointed out to me that when the letters are written to the 7 churches and to the angels of the 7 churches, there's actually precedent for that maybe being the teachers of the different churches, and that assumed within the church. I mean, Ephesians 4, you've got teachers, people who are the Bible nerds of the ancient world, and who could take images like beasts or horns or the chaotic sea waters, those sorts of things, and unpack them for their audience. So yeah, some things are going to land for people, and other things, it's always been Bible nerds kind of helping people unpack all of the nuance and the artistry and the depth and the insight that are within the scriptures themselves.
Yeah, and something else that you talk about in the book is the way that Revelation will use the Old Testament, and the amount of imagery that John is pulling from the Old Testament, and he doesn't even really, for modern day readers, give us a heads up. Those readers in the actual original audience, they would have picked up on that.
Yeah.
How significant is the relationship between Revelation and the Old Testament?
I'm not sure that we can overstate its significance. The old what Christians call the Old Testament is, I mean, it's the Hebrew scriptures. Kind of, we've rearranged them a little bit, but it's the Hebrew scriptures, and that is the Bible of the early church. You know,
Mm,
that's their scripture, um, because the rest of it's being written,
mm.
and so
Yeah.
he uh, John is somebody, whoever the precise identity of John is. I mean, scholars debate that, but whoever this is somebody who is fully devoted to Jesus of Nazareth as both, um, his human Lord and as his God, as the end of the Gospel of John says. But it's also somebody who is profoundly familiar with, the plot of the story so far in the Hebrew
Mm,
scriptures. This is the it seems like he's self-consciously taking all of that story and bringing it to a climax. And so if you I grab all kinds of different Bible translations, and the one that I happen to have in front of me right now is, it's a kind of an unfamiliar, newish uh, translation of the Bible called the Tree of Life version. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's a group of Messianic Jewish scholars
hmm.
who went through and translated the scriptures, and they transliterate a whole lot of Jewish and Hebrew words. But I love that I've never seen a translation of Revelation that has more footnotes here at the bottom of the page.
Oh, wow,
It's
okay.
just every single page of Revelation, they're doing a great job of tapping into, no, he's not saying thus fulfills the scripture, or I'm quoting the Bible here. But man, every single image that he's using is has a has an antecedent, as a precedent in the Old Testament itself. Um,
Mm,
and so, yes, being familiar with the story thus far, and how images get used in the Old Testament, that is the best bet, one of your best sources for understanding what John is doing in his book.
yeah.
Um, do you want like an example or two of images,
I would love an
or
example or two, because I'm the
yeah?
example that's in my mind right now is, so when John is talking about the beast in Revelation,
Mhm.
well, Daniel is talking about a beast as well, and
Totally.
so
Yep.
odds are very good that John is talking about the same thing. Is it right?
Totally.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. I
Yes.
would love to hear some
Yes.
examples there. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not just a beast, though that could be, but it's a beast coming out of the sea.
Yeah.
you know, we could not be on firmer ground with saying
Mm,
yes, he's using these images in the way that Daniel, the scroll of Daniel, is using them. Particularly from, we've already cited it, but Daniel chapter 7 and 8, which, by the way, happens to be one of Jesus's most central important passages rattling around in his brain, because he's always, the title he calls himself the most is the Son of Man, which
mm,
comes from exactly that chapter, Daniel 7. And at the beginning of that chapter, you have these horrible monsters just emerging out of the waters. And the waters, from the very first page of the Bible in Genesis 1, the waters, the deep, have been an image of chaos, have been an image of um, that of non-order, or even worse, of disorder. So that and it's something that God effortlessly overcomes at the beginning of the Bible by just speaking, and he's bringing dry land out of the chaos waters. And then in Daniel 7, the beasts coming out of disorder, out of chaos. We're explicitly told later in the chapter what these are. These are kingdoms and kings. These are uh, rulers of the earth, and they are trampling on and devouring not just the world in general, but God's people in particular. And then God's people end up emerging victorious, um, in embodied in a representative, in one like the Son of Man who is going to the Ancient of Days, going to God, and sitting down and then having all authority handed to him and ruling the world. And so, yeah, you've got beasts here. You've got horns in that chapter. All the strange images. Man, if you Google search art of Revelation, the many heads and the horns, they can freak you out when people take these things as literal images. But the horns seem to be rulers as well, according to Daniel. And yeah, the sea is the source of chaos and disorder. And that's why at the end of Revelation, it's not that God hates surfing or hates, being on the beach and enjoying, but New Jerusalem doesn't have any sea because all of chaos and disorder has been banished by God. So yeah, it's sitting for a long time in the Hebrew scriptures is what gives you kind of like the vocabulary for and the glossary of what these images, most of them, mean.
Yeah. Man, Brett, I love what you're unpacking here, because just these simple things, that to see the relationship there that Revelation has with the Old Testament, even what the word itself means, the way that this literature works, just changes how we read it, interact with it, the questions that we have, because at so many different times, the book of Revelation, there's always a curiosity about it, but at so many different times, just the interest in it seems to rise to a new level because of questions that people seem to be asking. I remember when Y2K, so we're going back a little bit, but the year 2000, oh man, this was it. This was in Revelation, and our computers were going to shut down and everything like that. That's happening now on another level. And so, to date this podcast, here we are at September 2021. We're still in the middle of the pandemic, and there are all kinds of questions about COVID-19 and the book of Revelation. And so,
Sure.
so Brett, you gave me permission before to ask these questions because I wanted to dive into some questions that people are really sharing online and asking a lot. And so here we go. So the first one that I have is, Brett, is the COVID pandemic in the book of Revelation?
I don't think so. I want to be as open-minded and as hospitable to other views as I can be, but no. I mean, unless you're just stretching images and metaphors like crazy, I can think of like in I think it's the fifth trumpet. There are demon locusts, an awful army of demon locusts that come out and they inflict people with some sort of pain, and they're wanting to die and they can't. And then I can think of there's boils that come on people's skin, in the very first bowl of God's wrath in Revelation 16. But no, unless you're stretching the images, and we don't really mean boils. What we mean is, a lung disease. Well, that just that is beyond what I can see the images meaning. And so no, I don't think so. And yet the book of Revelation is written to a church in crisis and is holding before them what their vocation is in a crisis. Local persecution that has been decreed on a national level, if we want to call it, by the government of Rome. And the call of Revelation is to be victorious, to endure, and particularly that enduring and victory is chapter 14, it's following the Lamb wherever he goes and loving like Jesus did in the midst of crisis. When everyone else is going crazy, the church is loving and giving themselves over for the life of the world, just like the Lamb did. And in that way, it's not speaking about COVID-19, but it's definitely speaking to what our vocation must be in the midst of COVID-19.
Yeah. One of the things that I've heard several people say is, so when you say, look at, the four horsemen of the apocalypse and, death and war and those kind of things. I've heard a lot of people say that though, speaking about war, things like that, that it's so vague that that war at any point in history fits under that category. And I've heard people say that about pandemics in general, bringing that out. What do you think about that? That so the one of the four horsemen, death. I've heard people say that it's intentionally so vague. What did you say?
The third one is actually pestilence.
There we go.
And so I guess I was thinking of specific symptoms, but yeah, in general, you've got the desire to conquer, and the best I can understand of the four horsemen, you've got the desire to conquer coming out in the white horse, and a conquering white horse. You've got the red horse of war, of destructive human violence. Then you've got pestilence and famine kind of coming afterwards, and then you've got death, the green horse coming after, and so or the pale horse is what it's often said. And so those things are really general kinds of things, and best I can understand it, I mean, those images are they are tied to a specific thing. They are seals. They're little wax bits that are holding closed the God's plans for the world, the meaning of human history, what God wants to accomplish. They're seals on a scroll, and the scroll seems to be borrowed from the later part of Daniel, and that there's been a buildup from chapter 5 on who can open the scroll, and then as you're opening the scroll, these things are tearing off. We're seeing what is preventing God's plans from being made manifest in the world. And you see, it's less about something happening in the year 2021 or in the year 3528. This is in general the thing that plagues humanity all the time.
Yeah, that is so helpful. So that is so helpful versus sometimes you said it earlier, there's a code in Revelation, we have to crack it, and part of the code is that this pandemic we're in now is in the book. And so when I approach the book of Revelation as if it's a code to break, I start taking that book in all kinds of different directions it was never meant to go.
Totally.
That's very helpful. Yeah, that's really good. Here's the next question. Is the COVID vaccine the mark of the beast?
No. No, it's
boom, done deal.
It's not.
Could you unpack why it's not?
Yeah, sure. But
that would be great if you just left it right there and then we just moved on.
On a side note about the COVID vaccine, one of the more helpful things I've been trying to point people towards is there's a whole lot of you can get your information from any kind of cable news channel you want that's just going to repeat what you already believe. And all of us have to fight really hard against that. I have been encouraged by, over the years, I've gotten to know Francis Collins, not personally, but as a person. Yeah. Francis Collins, who is the head of the NIH, who is Friends. He's a devout Christian, outspoken Christian, he was head of the Human Genome Project, founded BioLogos. He's friends with N.T. Wright. I don't know if I already said that, but if not, it's worth repeating. Um, that this is a man who is a devout Christian and also a civil servant and a scientist, and who has no. I knew him before the pandemic and was listening to him talk about theology and science, and he's one of the voices that like don't trust cable news channels that are interested in just peddling fear to get ratings and make money. Sorry if that's too cynical, but listen to people, to civil servants. Learn. It's like anything. You can trust information about vaccines or whatever else when you know people. And he's somebody that I listen to. And then I'm listening to John as well, because John actually, when he brings up the mark of the beast in chapter 13, it's one of 2 times in the book that he seems to like turn to any readers of the book of Revelation, and he actually invites them to kind of decode what he's doing. He recognizes this is something. I have put a little puzzle right here, and it's a fairly simple puzzle, and I want you to solve it. The 2 times he does this is in Revelation 13 with the mark of the beast, and then Revelation 17 when he's talking about the various kings that are coming. In it's I'm looking for it right now, but it's 17 verse 9. The various heads of the beast that the woman is riding on. He says in verse 18 of chapter 13, here is wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is a number of a man, and his number is 666. And I mean, you can Google 666 along with Nero, and you can discover what scholars almost have a consensus on, that somehow John is referring to the tyrannical reign of Nero with this, and he's saying that this that's not saying that he is saying it's Nero. He's saying it's Nero-like. Whether or not this was written in the 60s with Nero or written in the 90s under the reign of Domitian, this is a Nero-like thing happening of oppressing Christians, making them deny the lordship of Jesus and their allegiance to him, and that is beastly. So no, I don't think it's the vaccine.
Yeah, and so the mark itself, when tell me what you think about this. I was listening to the Bible Project.
Oh sure.
And they were not talking about this, but they were talking about the mark of the Lord in in Revelation, and the seal of the Lord. Okay, and that has an Old Testament connection. Am I right?
Yeah.
So when I want to know, what the mark of the beast is, should I ask myself, well, what is the mark of the Lord?
That's exactly right. Yeah, because that's the whole point of Revelation 7, is there have already been people who have been sealed they're breaking seals off, the little wax bits, and then they use seal in a different way of like, we need to go and seal people angels are having this conversation. We need to go seal people because there are lots of people. There's an entire army of people who are going to make it through all of the hardship that's coming their way.
Yeah. And so to be sealed is to be marked. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yep. And that has its roots in Ezekiel, in a vision that Ezekiel has.
So would that be so the mark of the Lord? So if I'm going to go that route, that's not an actual mark. So there's some symbolic language. Is that right? And it's symbolic. What is it symbolic of?
Yeah, it is not a physical mark, and what it is pointing us towards is allegiance with and devotion to either the Lamb, who is giving his life for the sake of the world in chapter 5 verse 6, or allegiance to and devotion to the beast. And the beast is doing the opposite. The beast is trampling, is using violence, coercion, speaking lies and falsehoods, and basically every form of coercion that you can imagine. And these are two antithetical ways of living in the world. And so live in a way where you are devoted to the God we see in Jesus, the Lamb, and not to, I mean, it's Antichrist, even though the word never shows up in the book of Revelation. This is anti-Christ. This is the dark mirror of Jesus. The image is really silly that's coming to my mind is Negaduck in Darkwing Duck. There was an equal and opposite Darkwing Duck that was Negaduck, and so you don't want to follow Negaduck is what every podcast listener should take away from this.
Brett, I've got to give you a lot of respect for just pulling that out right then.
Oh, sure.
That Darkwing Duck reference. That's powerful. That you're speaking to my soul. You're preaching right now, brother. I love it. So how does that connect with, I don't have this text in front of me. So how does, so the mark of the beast, allegiance to the beast, it's a lifestyle of allegiance to the beast. How does that connect with, what people always ask? And again, I don't have the text in front of me, but they're not able to buy, sell, that language.
Sure.
What is the relationship there? How does that connect?
Sure. So, I mean, that you're talking about Revelation 13, where you've got, it's verse 17 of chapter 13. No one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. On a really kind of like flat level, you've got, this has got a corollary to Roman markets in some cities, best we can tell, that you would walk into a Roman market and there was a statue of either some sort of Roman god or goddess, or maybe even a likeness of the emperor himself. And you take and you throw a pinch of incense in to just show your allegiance to Rome and its system. And this was something that everybody took for granted in that culture. It would, if you didn't do it, it would be like not holding your hand over your heart, at a baseball game while the national anthem is being sung in the United States. That it's like everybody kind of looks at you with, like, they're cutting their eyes at you saying, what in the world is that person doing? Because it's so taken for granted that that you're not that you're doing something wildly inappropriate, and not showing homage to and honor to the giant meta structures that you live in, the sacred things that are around you. And so, people can't get into the market unless they do that, or risk being, potentially persecuted and outed as somebody who is devoted to Jesus. On a bigger level, Revelation 18 has got like this. It's got a number of poems that are where you've got all these different people that are mourning the fall of the great system of Babylon, and then you've got people celebrating it as well. And it's talking about how the economy actually got built. And it's 18 verse 11 is talking about the merchants of the earth weep and mourn because no one buys their merchandise anymore. So this is the marketplace that people can't get into. They can't buy or sell without having the mark of the beast and bearing his number. That, by the way, 6 falls short of 7 in triplicate, and so it's falling short of perfection. It's doing double duty or triple duty, perhaps, as far as symbolism goes. But then it's naming in verse 12 on, it's naming all the different products that were there in the markets. And then at the very end of this, it builds up cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, and wheat, cattle, sheep, horses, and chariots, and bodies is literally what the Greek says. It says slaves, that is human souls. And then it's decrying by the end of this chapter in verse 24 that Babylon, this great economic system, is actually has on her hands the blood of the prophets and the holy ones and all those slaughtered on the earth. It's what it says. And so it's linking, Revelation is linking. There is a giant economic system that is built on violence and oppression and slave labor and if you are following the way of the Lamb, you are and you haven't bought in entirely to the system. At the very least, you would be questioning the system somewhere deep within your soul of saying, I can't buy or sell like without contributing to this giant system. And that's very hard, and it raises all kinds of questions for the modern church. But man, yeah, I think it's an issue of every generation, and this generation right now, not necessarily just the last generation with some sort of UN type government boogeyman, reigning over us. I mean, it's a question about like we're mining for, is it cobalt that's in lithium batteries, I want to say, and we're doing it in Africa on the backs of children. All of our electronic devices are. And so like, if nothing else, that ought to unsettle us, and we ought to be asking questions about how can we not buy or sell in this marketplace,
Man, that's powerful. That's powerful. So Brett, one more question. So here's my last question, and this will, you've been so gracious with your time. So this is my last question for our time today as well. So are we living in the last days?
Yeah, that would be the $1 million question. I hope so. I would like to see Jesus return in glory to judge the living and the dead, to make all things right in the world, and to bring about the restoration of all things. I would love to see that. As far as whether or not that is pointed to by the book of Revelation, I do not think so. I think the book of Revelation is a document that is challenging the church into its vocation of embodying the life of the Lamb by his Spirit for the good of the world. And the world's conversion is some profound scholarship that Bauckham has done on the book of Revelation, is pointing the church to its vocation in every single generation, regardless of how the beasts or the sea of chaos, how it's, quaking or crashing up against our shores right now, whatever the beast happens to be doing and manifesting in our generation, we are to be faithful within this, within our time here. And so, I think that's the call of the book of Revelation, not pointing us towards we're in the last times right now. Good Lord, I hope that we are. I hope we are, but we don't have any way of knowing that from the book of Revelation. I'm afraid, if I would just be as candid as possible.
Yeah, because when people ask that question, a lot of times they mean, are we living in the last days, as in, can you pinpoint the day that Jesus is coming back?
Totally.
And I think that you reference this in your book. Again, I don't have it in front of me, but I was thinking of Peter's sermon in Acts chapter 2 when he quotes Joel, and when he quotes that and says, "In the last days, God will." When he is quoting that, is he talking about when he says "in the last days"? Because he's basically saying that the prophecy of Joel seems to be being fulfilled right there in the Sermon of Pentecost. When he says that, he means something completely different than, say, somebody online that says we're living in the last days and it's next Tuesday at 3, Jesus is coming back.
Totally. Yeah. If the way that we use the phrase last days, I would answer candidly, I hope so. We have no way of knowing. Yeah, as far as the way that the Bible uses the last days, Galatians opens by saying that Jesus in his self-giving death has rescued us from this present evil age.
Hmm.
And then at the end of Galatians, he bookends it with all that matters is new creation. Like we are living in new creation right now.
Wow.
And so there's an overlap of the ages that's taken place according to the worldview presented in the New Testament writers. And they are understanding the last days as when Yahweh, the God of Israel, is bringing his promised kingdom through his Messiah to the earth. That has begun, that has been inaugurated in the life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus.
Hmm.
So yes, if we're talking in those terms, we are living in the last days, and we're living in the first days. We're living in the grand overlap of the ages.
Mm. Wow, I love that. I love that way you put that. That we're living in the last days and the first days. Oh,
Yeah.
that's powerful. Brett, thank you so much for your time today, man. This has been so good. This has been so helpful.
Oh
Um,
man, thanks for having me.
yeah. Hey, so Brett, tell us where people can connect with you online.
So you can check out brettdavis.org because it feels really self-serving to me, but apparently it's the easiest thing just to have your name. Brett Davis, two T's.org. And then on Twitter, it's Brett Allen Davis is my Twitter handle, I suppose. Allen is ALAN. And yeah, I'm an infrequent tweeter, and I try to keep this blog of a website open as much as I can, just to point people towards the book. If you want to find the book, Amazon's the easiest place. See the Strange, pretty easy to find there.
Yeah, and we will link we'll link to all of that in the show notes. We'll link to the book in the show notes. See the Strange, the Gospel according to Revelation. Pick up the book. Everybody watching, listening, make sure you pick it up, check it out. You will not regret it. It'll bless you. Brett, thanks so much for coming on, man. This has been awesome.
Oh, thanks, man. Thanks for having me.